Leading and Managing Across Cultures, presented by Heidrick and Struggles. Different times call for different leadership and recruitment methods, and having the right people in place can make or break a company's international strategies and methods. Listen as we explore central themes and issues and how companies can and should solve international challenges with the right choices in leadership. This session was recorded live from the stage at GetGlobal 2017 in Los Angeles, October 25th, 2017. Our guests include Elisabetta Bartoloni, a partner at international executive recruiting and culture-shaping firm Heidrick and Struggles, and Matthew Herzberg, a principal at culture-shaping firm Senn-Delaney, a Heidrick and Struggles company.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome CEO of GetGlobal, Julian Leuthold.
Thank you all for being here with us. I see a lot of familiar faces from last year. It was a great year and we had a wonderful time, and the thing that really made the impression on me last year was how easy everything was to meet people, to learn new things and exchange stories, and the most amazing kind of cross-pollination. And I'm really seeing that again today, and I'm so happy about it. I hope you are too. Really, thank you for coming back. And thanks for being here. This session is about culture. Many different kinds of culture. There's what we call deep culture on the national historical memory level. There's corporate culture. There's personal culture, your own memory and the way that you treat the world and your autopilot and the way you confront challenges and opportunities. And we're going to navigate through all of these really today and look at also sort of how to lead organizations across cultures. So we have with us Elisabetta Bartoloni.
Hi,
she
everybody.
is a partner at Heidrick and Struggles, an executive search and leadership firm. Elisabetta, why don't you tell us a little bit?
Sure. Thank you, by the way, for having us here. It's very exciting. It is our second year. And in terms of Heidrick and Struggles, it is a global executive search firm. We have 40 offices in the world. And we were founded in 1953 by two gentlemen in Chicago. Our firm covers executive search and all sectors. So think about TMT, consumer, financial services, and so on. At the CEO board, CFO, and down to VP levels, I would say. What I find interesting in talking about cultures with recruiting is that our firm, for probably the first 40 years, really offered to our clients primarily only recruiting services. In the last 10 years, we have probably bought over 5 companies to add to our offerings for our clients the consulting piece related to building a firm. So we realize that it's not anymore just hiring a person that will change a firm. Is going to be all the rest of the consulting services that we can offer, like culture shaping, which we'll talk about it, coaching, assessments, and so on, so that the firm can grow not only with external efforts, but also within the firm with their own capabilities, just taking it to the next level. And yes, I've been at the firm for 7 years, in the business for 17. And Matt is my colleague here.
So Matthew Herzberg is a principal at Senn-Delaney, which is a company of Heidrick and Struggles. So he's in the culture shaping part of the company. And so we have with us today both leadership and executive sort of characteristics and the culture element as well, which together are such an important part of doing international business well.
Yeah, so our firm actually is part of Heidrick and Struggles now, but we have a 40-year history of really working with executive leadership teams to build what we call healthy, thriving, high-performance cultures, and that's domestically based firms, but also a lot of global firms as well. My own experience also is in a previous life, I actually headed up human resources at 2 different companies. One was very much a domestic-based U.S. firm who was trying to move into Asia Pacific, and that effort didn't go very well, right? And for many cultural reasons. The other firm I headed up HR at was a firm where 80% of our revenue, 80% of the employees were actually outside of the United States. And so it was just an entirely different experience in terms of how we approach the world, how we approach working in different places in the world. And for us, it was very easy to move in and out of different countries just based upon the way we thought about the world.
So one of the themes of GetGlobal this year is that states make the rules. Countries, they set the rules within their borders, and they can either be helpful to your company from your host country, from your home country going into the host country, or they can be difficult and challenging, and it doesn't quite work well with where you come from. On the host country side, there's legislation that folks need to be thinking about that can affect every part of the business. And equal pay seems to be something that is both socially driven right now and a very important topic worldwide. Mm-hmm. Tell us about what's going on with that.
Absolutely. So this is a topic that's very interesting because, again, you see culture now affecting recruiting. So there's been a lot of research that shows that teams that are diverse are producing better results. The issue is that we don't have that many diverse senior leaders to put them into senior leadership teams. So how do we fix this? And there are a lot of programs which we can talk about, and if you have questions, we can probably open up later. But one thing that is interesting is how the legislation now is catching up. So what has been also researched very well is that women versus men women makes less money than men for the same jobs, which creates a lot of dynamics within an organization. So certain jurisdictions like New York, California is coming up very shortly, Massachusetts and others have basically come up with new regulations where you cannot ask your candidates anymore about their past compensations in conjunction to a role. The compensation for a role should be determined by the value of the seat. So this seems for some people very strange, and especially for foreigners, very strange, because it's something that we've never seen. But it's something to be taken seriously because there are very big sanctions, like up to $250,000 for not respecting this law. In New York, it's coming up in effect on October 31st, so a few days. California is going to be December 1st, and Massachusetts is already on. Now, I will tell you that firms like ours, as well as a lot of our clients, have basically adopted a nationwide policy where no matter what the role is in the US, we will not collect compensation information. And you can understand why, is because a lot of other jurisdictions are catching up, and also you will have certain candidates that you will have the information and certain others you don't, and you can see how potentially that could create problems along the line. So this is, I think, very interesting legislation-wise, something that comes from a culture piece and how it's affecting now recruiting.
Mm. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about how do you manage across cultures? How do you build a consistent culture across all of your offices globally? How does that work, and where do you get started?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question. And I think you almost have to kind of step back and just kind of look at it from a very big picture. And if you think about it, all organizations are trying to really do two things, regardless of what industry you're in or what you're in. And the first thing you're trying to do is adapt externally, right? Adapt to the external world, whether it's customer needs or changing regulations or new competitors, something like that. You're trying to adapt to the external world, but then you're also trying to integrate internally. And when I'm talking to most CEOs, what they're really interested in right now is if we have a global presence, how do we build this sense of community across the entire globe, regardless of what nations we're in or what the local customs might be or whatever might be the case. Two things that I think really lead to that. So the first is a definition of what it is that you're trying to create. And what I find is a lot of senior teams in corporations, they're very good at defining a strategy, maybe less good at actually defining a really solid structure, but usually they think through the structure piece. Yet the culture piece, what are the underlying values of the organization? How do we show up as a leadership team? Really goes relatively unaddressed. And so the first step is, how do we define what it is that we stand for in terms of our purpose, in terms of our values? And then secondly is, how do we align around that? And what our research demonstrates is that you have to have alignment at the top, right? If you don't have alignment at the top, you can't expect there to be alignment lower in the organization. So it's those two things. What do we do to define? And then secondly, what can we do to really align around those things?
So what are some tips? What are the best practices? How do you actually get into the doing?
So a couple things. So first of all, it's a matter of diagnosing where you're at currently. And again, this is all about, we don't do culture for, at least most of my clients, they're not doing culture for a nice to, they're doing it for a need to, right? They're seeing it as a business mandate. If their business is really gonna, if they're gonna optimize their business, they have to be able to pull this culture thing together, so that if we think about culture as the shared mindsets that exist in an organization, the shared thinking, right? And for us, thinking drives behavior, which drives your results, right? So your thinking drives certain behaviors, which drives your ability to get results. And what happens as the world changes, now we have a new strategy. So if the strategy is over here and it's aligned to the structure and it's aligned to the culture, now all of a sudden the strategy moves and you have this new strategy, yet you have these old mindsets in the organization that are really old ways of thinking that are really getting in the way and preventing you to be able to actually realize that strategy. And so what we find is the very first thing, diagnose, understand where you're at, what are the elements that are really going to drive performance in your business. Be clear about that. Secondly, align around that. And here's the tough thing about culture. Again, if culture exists at the thinking level, if I were to ask you right now what your thought habits were, write down your top 10 thought habits. You wouldn't be able to do it because it's just part of your code, right? It's just in there. It's in your DNA. And so what you have to do is really what we find the best practice, pulling teams together, aligning teams around it, and giving them a chance to experience what those thought habits are. And you can't just tell people what their thought habits are. They have to be able to experience it, look at it, think about when does that thought habit help them in terms of the behaviors that they're exhibiting, and when does it maybe trip them up in terms of being able to expand into a new country or whatever might be the case. Now, what I find right now with most executives, what they're trying to do globally, and it doesn't matter if you're a UK-based firm and you have US operations, a US-based firm who has Australian operations, CEOs worldwide, there's really three things I hear them asking for. First is, what can we do in terms of creating a greater sense of team? And having our executives think, or our managers think a level up. So they're not just worried about their little piece of the puzzle, they're thinking about the whole puzzle. Second thing is around innovation. What can we do to get new ideas into the organization and to lead to growth? And then the third thing is around accountability. How can we get that sense of ownership kind of spreading throughout the entire organization? And so if you can create a situation to where now you can see these thought habits, you start aligning people towards those things that I just talked about, and then you do what you can to drive that through the organization. So it's not just an experience that the senior team goes through, but then we take it to the entire organization. And for global organizations, that means taking it to the entire organization worldwide, and creating an experience where people can have this common language and these common concepts that now they have a currency that they can really negotiate the conflict that just naturally exists in organizations and across cultures very often.
When it comes to actually implementing that with offices in many different places in the world, what's like your top tip?
So I would say when you think about your expanding your team outside of the US, what we see the best practices to really prevail are, one, pick a leader that really is agile and flexible and is able to adapt to that culture. Not just the top salesperson, which is many times that's the issue. And then give him we're talking about defining the mission. So usually, again, what works best is basically giving a mandate to a person to say, you're going to be in that country for 2 years and your job is to find your replacement. And when you come back, your role will be XYZ, and you will be most likely also responsible at that point for a bigger region, which that region that you build is going to be part of it. So at that point, all the incentives, clearly, to do a good job, to do it fast, to hire the right person in the role are all aligned. Vice versa, many times we see that the mission is not defined right, there is not a time frame assigned to it, and there is not a role back home for that individual. So what happens is that the person is going to be afraid of basically replacing himself and be out of a job. And that's where a lot of things don't work out. The other piece that I think is very important is having a good HR system. Clearly, HR has become very important, and we talked about legislation before. There are a lot of other nuances. And have an HR internal that also will use external consultants, either recruiters or other consultants that might be, pertinent to whatever you're trying to do. But that's very important. And then for certain countries, maybe kind of create a board of advisors. Or advisory board, that's how usually people refer to it. So basically people that are very senior, understand very well that country. They don't have anything particular ties to do any particular job per se, but they can be your advisor. And that kind of gets you away from a lot of different problems that can come along the line.
What would you say are the key insights that you've learned that you were surprised to learn about how you solve problems in foreign markets with people?
I would say is a combination, and that's why Matt and I are here together, of understanding, diagnose the problem, and listening, because many times we come in with preconceived notions of what might be the problem. And sometimes it's right, and sometimes it's wrong. So the first part is diagnose the problem. And second of all is really approaching it from an integrated solution. So it's not just about replacing potentially that person, because we might get the same problems if the culture is not right, if the system of incentives are not right. So we need to do a 360 and then implement. So if the person is really not right, then we'll replace it. But if the person just needs some coaching and some awareness, then we'll do that instead. And that's much less disruptive, clearly.
And if I were to just add to that, when I think about it, part of the work that we do with senior teams, kind of enabling concepts that we always work on is curiosity and humility, right? Mm-hmm. Curiosity and humility. And I find that works at the organization level when you're trying to work in different cultures, right? When we're talking about geographic type cultures, but also individually. If I really think about the leaders that I've bumped into over the years who are just tremendously effective, they're very curious people and they're very humble, right? And so if they don't understand something, they don't just automatically go to judgment. They're trying to figure out, well, what's going on here? And the final thing is they usually are able to appreciate others. So it's almost like we use the word inclusion quite a bit. How do you include others? And if you have those three things of the curiosity, the humility, and then also just that kind of that natural openness to working with others and looking for the best in others, I see those folks as pretty fungible and being able to work across the globe.
Well, let's go for that. So that concludes our session. Thank you all for hearing us out about culture and leadership.
Thank you.